Hey guys, Pat here. Man, I am a huge fan of The Room. I mean, I was a fan way back in the day, and I'm not being a hipster about this saying I was into The Room before it was cool. Plenty of people knew about the film well before me. But I was there in those early days when it was just kind of an internet thing, before everyone seemed to know about it. I mean, LA people knew about it because of the billboard Tommy put up, but a lot of people never heard of the film until it was shown on Adult Swim. I think Tim and Eric were the ones who really pushed that. But needless to say, though, I love The Room like a lot of you. I've seen it. I can't even count how many times I've seen the movie, actually. But even more so, I'm a fan of Greg Sestero's book, The Disaster Artist. And beyond that, I'm an even bigger fan of his audiobook. Now, before I go into the review of James Franco's movie adaptation of that book and covering the making of The Room and him playing Tommy Wiseau, let me give you a little background on the book, because that's really going to affect my review, because my viewing of this film was really messed up by having the knowledge of the book beforehand and knowing a lot of this stuff. Because to me, a lot of the stuff that doesn't work about this movie, for me, and this is subjective, I don't like this as an adaptation of the book. I don't like this as a telling of this story. And I'm really not a fan of how it depicted a lot of these events. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad movie, and I don't think it is, and I think it has a lot of good qualities, but I am not with the critics on this movie. Critics are loving this movie. I'm more with the audiences, where it's dropping really bad at the box office. I get why people are not liking this movie. Audiences. It's not catching on with the mainstream. I'm not saying critics. Critics seem to love it. James Franco's getting praised. My issues really come down to tone, execution, direction. I thought a lot of those things were very flawed. I was very confused about the acclaim of this movie. But then I wondered, did a lot of those people who review this not read the book or know a lot of this stuff beforehand? So this is the first time they got some of this information. See, that's the hard part when you're trying to review a movie like this, is that the more knowledge you have about the stuff, I think takes away from it. To whereas if you went in blind and you just saw The Room, and this was your first exposure to any of the things going on behind the scenes, you'd really like it, I assume. But I don't know, because I still think a movie can overcome that, and I would still love this movie anyway, because I love a lot of movies that are based off books that are nothing like the book they're based off of. And don't get me wrong, this has a lot of stuff from the book. Almost everything in this movie, dialogue, moments, and stuff like that, is from Greg Sestero's book. The book's good, but I only recommend the audiobook, and I'm not trying to say, oh, audiobook so book so bad. You know, I hate the snobby arguments people have that reading it's better than listening to it and vice versa. It depends on the book, quite frankly. Not every book's better when you read it, and not every book's better when you listen to it. It's back and forth, and what you like to do. You know, yeah, I don't want to hear an audiobook of a Hemingway novel. I'm sure there's some good ones, but I'd rather just read it and see his prose. The thing with The Disaster Artist is when you listen to the audiobook, Greg Sestero, you know, it's kind of a memoir, so he's reading out his own life. Now, books like that, like, for instance, A Running with Scissors by Augustine Burroughs, I like when not a director, but when a writer, the author of the book, is reading their own book. And the way they deliver it and present it to you can be very entertaining, in particular when it's a memoir like that. Now, when it's just a fiction book, I don't think it works as well. But Greg reading the book, I think, adds another dimension to it, and that's not it. He also does this perfect Tommy Wiseau impression. Maybe the best one I've heard. So his impression mixed with the story and all that just adds this whole thing to it. So that audiobook, which I think is like 11 hours long, I'd say it's so much better than the book. It's a waste of time to even pick the book up and read it. Just go get the audiobook. It's a really good book either way. I think it's a very entertaining, great book. It kind of plays off like Ed Wood. And what Greg Sestero is doing with the book is he's kind of deconstructing a lot of things. Like, he went to go see The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is one of my favorite parts in the book, and he then showed the movie to Tommy, which clearly influenced The Room. And he starts to kind of make those connections with dialogue throughout. And then also it's playing homage to Sunset Boulevard, the great film by Billy Wilder, and yeah, Ed Wood. So it has all these different elements that really make Tommy come off like this almost scary figure, this mystery that can't be solved. And as you get deeper and deeper into it, it starts to become a very engaging book. Not about these guys' friendships, but the psychology of this guy, and then Greg Sestero trying to figure him out, and then even beyond that, the auditions and failing as an actor, and getting to do a retro puppet master, and then just having a lull of a career and making the room. All of those elements are so entertaining and insightful, and it's so much about failure just being a scale of how you view success and failure. Like, you're only a failure if you view yourself as such, if you're unhappy with it and you're unhappy with the reception of it and how people act. But if you're happy with how things turned out yourself, it's not really a failure. But I love that audiobook. I've listened to it like 3 times. I just have people come over sometimes and I just play parts from the audiobook and I'm like, you got to hear this. This is so funny. So I've already gone on 6 minutes without talking about the movie. And that's because a lot of the stuff I said in that book, that audiobook there for you, is what they're trying to do in this movie. James Franco, I saw him on Howard Stern talking about it, and he said what Greg Sestero did with that book and what was genius about it was that he made it the story of every artist. That he made it the story of that these guys dreamed as big as Steven Spielberg, that these guys cared as much as anyone else, they just weren't talented. Now, I agree with him, that's kind of what the book is, that's that Ed Wood thing, but at the same time, I think he's kind of ignoring all the other elements of that book that are so fascinating, like the Mr. Ripley stuff. And that stuff's not in the movie. Now, here's my theory. Tommy has said that 40% of Greg Sestero's book is true and the other part isn't true. Now, I think like 90-something% of the book is true personally, and from the research I've done on it, it seems pretty valid. But who knows? Maybe Greg, embellished some of the stuff, but it didn't feel that way. Either that or Greg's an amazing writer because it's a really well-written book that has these great stories. So either he's an amazing writer or these are just real stories and they're very interesting and entertaining. And I'm more inclined to think that these are just real stories and that's why it's so good. But my theory is because Tommy had to approve of the stuff with the room. See, I don't think James Franco was allowed to film the room stuff and use some of the room footage without Tommy's approval. So I think to get this movie made, James Franco had to compromise. He had to cut out a lot of the good stuff that's in the book, like the hinting at Tommy's backstory, like I said, the Mr. Ripley stuff, Greg being scared of Tommy and having issues with him and not liking the movie and knowing it's a bad movie and not really putting any effort into his acting. I mean, there's a lot of those factors that aren't in this movie. This movie kind of reshapes the story, which, don't get me wrong, it's fine. It's a movie. It's not the book. I'm not trying to be a book purist here. But one of my issues with this is that I think it makes the film weaker and more shallow because they ignored those things. See, if you know all this stuff already, this film isn't as interesting. You can watch it as a movie and go, oh, this character Tommy's really good in this movie, and it's about friendship and these guys making a bad movie, but then everyone laughing at the end and it being about, like, hey, you made people happy. It doesn't matter if it's not a good movie. People enjoy it, and it's going to play for years, and it's a classic. And they even start at the beginning with actors talking about how much they love The Room. It's just random people, too, like Kristen Bell. It's like, okay. My issue with all that, though, is that just isn't... To me, that's not that interesting. This whole movie only really works because of The Room. The best parts of this movie, for me, is the stretch when they're filming The Room. And all that really is watching the funny scenes from The Room, like, oh, hi, Mark, done again. And that's only funny because of Tommy Wiseau. And then the ending of the movie when they have the premiere. Because what originally happened was the premiere went horrible. And it wasn't until later on, before the 2-week run was up, that some film students came to see it, and then it became a big cult thing. Slowly. It wasn't the first night, but in this movie they make it like on the premiere, everyone laughed and was applauding and loved the movie, and that's not how it happened. But I get you have to condense things for a movie. But that's my problem. James Franco condensed way too much. He doesn't give anything enough time to get fleshed out here. This movie's way too quickly paced. I don't dislike quick pacing, but it's like, this could have been Boogie Nights. This could have really been that kind of movie. This could have been a great movie. I mean, and those scenes when they're on the set did kind of remind me of Boogie Nights, and those are my favorite parts. It reminds me when they're making the porn, in particular the scene with Mark Wahlberg and, God, I can't remember her name right now, but Julianne Moore, when they first do their scene together. And I like that a lot. I think his name's Paul Schaefer, the guy from The League. Andre's in this, Seth Rogen's in this, and they're terrific. They're probably the best part of the movie is they're playing like the straight guys who are telling Tommy, like, none of this makes any sense. Why are we filming this? And then he argues with them. So the best parts of the movie are some of the set pieces from the book, like Tommy being naked during the sex scene and walking around and all that. That's a great part of the movie, and it really works. Greg meeting Tommy at an acting class where Tommy's doing the Stella scene from Streetcar Named Desire. All that's really good, but it's the approach Franco takes. I think he was a bad choice as a director. James Franco's made like 22 movies that nobody's ever seen. They're all these really pretentious, low-budget art films. He's written books. I've read one of his books, and it was really bad. He's a painter. I don't hate James Franco either. This isn't a knock James Franco thing. In fact, I think his performance as Tommy is one of the best parts of the movie. I really do. He impressed me. I thought he was very good. But he's lacking as a filmmaker. He really just took all these scenes he knew were good from the book. Like, this is a great moment, this is a great moment. And he just kind of filmed them. He didn't really add anything to it, an energy, anything that made it introspective. He didn't really go into the darker elements of Tommy. This movie really makes it like Greg and Tommy are just like the best bros ever, and it focuses on those elements, and it only hints at Tommy doing things like he makes Greg shave the beard so then Greg can't get the role on Malcolm in the Middle. Or there's a moment where Tommy gets really jealous of the girlfriend that Greg has. And that stuff's in the book, but it's so much deeper. And this movie's like 100 minutes long when it needs to be longer and flesh this stuff out. I mean, it's so quick, like, Tommy and Greg meet at this acting class. Greg just says, I want to be confident like you. They have this funny scene in a restaurant, and then it's like, I mean, it's not that long after that, they're just making the room, and everything gets so condensed. It just feels too quick. It feels like everything's slapped together, like, you don't really get to know Tommy as a character. Like, I think if The Room didn't exist and we didn't all know about Tommy, I don't know if critics or a lot of people would have loved this movie as much, because I think they're ignoring the fact that that's all part of it. You know, that it's because we know this is true. You know, if don't get me wrong, if this was an original movie, we'd all probably be praising this original character, Tommy Wiseau, and all these great ideas. But the difference between this and, let's say, an Ed Wood is that Ed Wood, sure, it makes a lot of stuff up. It's Tim Burton and the screenwriter's version of that story, with a lot of truth. But the friendship focus between Bela Lugosi and Ed Wood is just such the heart of the film, and so much more intelligent and handled just better. It's got more drama and tragedy to it. That's an over 2-hour film. They spend a lot of time developing the characters. We get to see, you know, Ed make several movies, you know, working on Glenn and Glenda, and then eventually getting up to Plan 9. So you really feel his journey and the years pass. You don't really get the sense of the journey in this movie. You know, this was a story that spans years, from Greg first meeting Tommy to years later, but this movie makes it like it all happened within 6 months of each other. Like they met and 6 months later they moved out to L.A. and were filming The Room, but that's just not how it happened. And I think it hurts the movie, because it makes the movie feel sloppier and more just like a buddy comedy. It just feels like another Seth Rogen, James Franco-esque movie, you know? It just feels like the Apatow crew, and they got a lot of people, and they got Rafi in this from The League. I mean, God, what's her name? The girl from Community's in this. There's a lot of people from TV and stuff like that. A lot of people I thought are really funny. They're underutilized, but it was nice to see them. Another one of my issues, I don't like that Dave Franco looks and sounds nothing like Greg Sestero. Not that he has to, but part of the appeal of Greg Sestero is his voice and kind of the way he looks. That's what's part of the charm. I think Dave Franco gives a very good performance. I just don't think he's playing Greg Sestero at all. I think he's playing this movie's version of a Greg Sestero. And that's just a lot of my issues with this. The book almost ruined this movie for me. But even without that, I think I would have just thought this movie was okay. Really, because I've seen Ed Wood before, and Ed Wood's a masterpiece and does all of this better. It's got better direction, acting, style, just more going on with it, more with the characters and being inside their heads. I think a real detriment to this movie was not having voiceover. And I know voiceover is a lazy narrative technique, but really, Greg reading the book is part of the appeal. It's his version of the story, so I don't know why Franco didn't choose to have narration, to play these events out in almost a documentary-like fashion, where you just show the events. I think makes them less interesting. They really do. Then it's just kind of funny on a surface level. See, like the first scene where Tommy auditions, or not auditions, but does the scene from Streetcar. You're hearing what Greg's saying in his head, and that really adds something to it, going back and forth. But in the movie, it's just Tommy doing it, and they show Greg like he's almost having like an orgasm from watching Tommy do it. It doesn't really have that thing about it, that extra layer. That's why I said it could have been like Boogie Nights. Let the Boogie Nights had voiceover. Let's say more like Goodfellas or Scorsese. But either him or Tommy, imagine if this movie had Tommy's narration, where it was all from Tommy's point of view. Then I could have accepted some of the stuff Franco did. See, the book being told from Sestero's point of view, it shows you how much that him and everyone else working knew Tommy was kind of crazy. They knew how all of his ideas were bad. None of the actors were putting any effort into the dialogue. They couldn't even say these lines right. But in this movie, they make it like Greg just blindly loves Tommy, and he does think the movie's going to be good, and he does think the dialogue's going to be good. And when he first reads the script, he tells Tommy it's great. And that's not what happened. When Greg first read the script, he told Tommy it was horrible and what was wrong with it. So it makes the movie feel less realistic. That's one of my issues, is that Tommy acts so crazy and cartoony, and for the most part, outside of a few of the crew members, nobody acts realistically around him. Like, Greg acts like he's just forgiving of everything, where part of the charm of the book is that Greg is always playing kind of the straight guy to Tommy's crazy. Well, in this, Greg is just more kind of a sidekick, but also the lead. I didn't like any of those choices at all. I thought those were all terrible choices. Why wouldn't... Because here's the thing. If it's from Tommy's point of view, this movie, if James Franco couldn't keep some of the deeper, darker stuff because Tommy didn't want it in the movie, which is fine, then you make the movie from Tommy's point of view. Tommy's narrating the story at the beginning. Oh, hi, I'm Tommy. This is my movie about my other movie. And you do kind of a meta thing where he's narrating the story. And since it's Tommy's version of things, a lot of the stuff that happens could be changed to fit Tommy's point of view. But Franco doesn't give the movie a point of view. It's split between Franco and Greg's point of view. It doesn't really... You could say Greg's the main character, but he's not at the same time. And yeah, they have stuff from the book, like his mom telling him he's going to be a failure. That's one scene. Or the stuff with the girlfriend, or the failed... It's just one scene, so it feels too short. It doesn't go anywhere. They just introduce plot lines like, here's an agent, and then the agent never comes back again. Here's the girlfriend. She doesn't really get much of a character arc and doesn't happen much. It just goes back to the Tommy-Greg friendship. There's just too many layers that are missing. It's an incomplete film. There's too many things that aren't fleshed out. Most of the supporting characters don't get fleshed out or have any backstory. And that's what sucks, is because those characters do have backstory, and Greg Sestero wrote it. And, I mean, I'm not kidding. The Disaster Artist, if there had been a proper adaptation, and you could keep James Franco in the role as Tommy, if there'd been a proper adaptation where it was actually close to the book and better directed by a more veteran director, not James Franco, because, like I said, I think a lot of the issues here is he just set the camera up with the DP and said, hey, let's shoot these awesome moments that are so funny, and he didn't really direct his movie. He didn't really give all of the characters things to do. He didn't really world build. He didn't really flesh things out. There's not even any establishing shots. The movie's just so much about interiors, which I know kind of plays back to like some of the bad filmmaking of The Room, but that meta aspect doesn't work for me if that's what Franco was going for. Having said that, though, once again, I don't think it's a bad movie. I thought it was entertaining. I had a really fun time watching it. I laughed a few times. It was stuff that I've already laughed at before, but I laughed at it again. But I don't find myself wanting to watch this movie again, and I don't think it's a great movie, and I'm not really sure what the critics saw in it, because it's another shallow making of movie where some director's making a movie and everything goes wrong. I've seen this kind of movie before many times. The only thing that makes it different is Tommy. Is the character of Tommy, and that's pretty much it. If you take Tommy out of this movie, it's just a generic group of people getting together to make a film. Now, that doesn't mean that the actors aren't great and it's not funny. It is funny, and it is nice to see Seth Rogen play the straight role here again. I really liked him in Steve Jobs doing that, playing Wozniak, and here I thought it was very good too. But yeah, I was just kind of sitting there the whole time. I wasn't bored, but I was detached. I never really feel like the film really got dug deep into the characters of the story. It always felt like it was a surface level. Like you were just kind of watching these people put costumes on and play these people, but never really becoming these people outside of James Franco. He really felt like he tried to become Tommy with his facial acting and the way he uses his eyes. And he looks really good when he has the sunglasses on. That's when I think he looks his best. But yeah, cutting out the backstory stuff and just having it be dialogue, like, where are you from, Tommy? Tell us where you're from. I'm from New Orleans. Like, it's very little in the movie. The football thing, all the stuff that's so great about the book that really adds that made it a great book, not just a telling of the making of The Room, is not in this movie. And instead, James Franco thinks, well, if I make it about these two guys and their friendship being so great, and I even end the movie on that, that's what this movie's about. But that's so much less interesting. That's so much less interesting than a chaotic film set with this crazy guy and his friend not knowing to do with him and all these other people. It's hardly even addressed in the movie. Greg is so forgiving to Tommy of so much in here, and I just, um, it's because yeah, it's just too quick. It's like a 100-minute long movie, and it feels more like a comedy film, like a Apatow bro comedy, than it ever does a film or a movie about movies or something deeper or with a lot of character development with an arc. There's really no arcs in this movie for the most part. And even Tommy, he's just a little bit too likable at the end. Like, I always felt just sympathetic for Tommy this whole movie. It just made me feel bad. I never really... Like, there's that scene where he's filming everyone, he tells them, I hear what you say about me. And that's an emotional part in the book, too, but, like, it's also really screwed up what he does. But the movie always kind of plays to the sympathy of Tommy. Once again, I think that's James Franco having to appease Tommy to get the movie made. And that hurt the movie. It really did, overall. It just hurt it way too much, because when the best parts of your movie are the stuff that's from The Room, that are just scenes that are already great, and watching people laugh and react to the movie and that joy that kind of comes from that, that's very telling that James Franco didn't really make a great movie. He just made a movie that's a sum of its parts. It's a movie of moments. There's scenes that work really well. There's moments that work really well. There's tonal shifts that work pretty well, in fact. But because it lacks a strong visual style, because it lacks a lot of personality, because it doesn't go to that next place, I don't think it's that great of a movie. I think it's an okay movie. I think it's an okay movie that's better than what you expect from James Franco directing it. But you can also see why James Franco isn't a very good director. It's just not his strength. He's not that great at setting up shots. His lighting was bad. I actually agree with Tommy Wiseau in this. I know it's the joke about the sunglasses. I thought the lighting to this movie was horrible. I really did. I was expecting something way nicer looking. I just thought it looked really... I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it was not great lighting. Even for a $10 million film, it wasn't that... I don't know if that was intentional, but it was like, this lighting is just okay. But it's... Once again, it had this documentary thing, and I did not like that, because a lot of the stuff in the movie is not realistic, and a lot of it's changed to suit a different tone. But Franco's direction doesn't reflect that, like I said, with the voiceover or point of view. So... he's trying to play it like this is all happening like in real time, like it's real, and it just doesn't work for me, that tone clash. Well, the book made it very clear that it was referencing Sunset Boulevard and Talented Mr. Ripley, and he would actually take quotes from those movies and use them to show his example, because he lived with Tommy and it was a Sunset Boulevard situation. That's what's engaging, going back to the Sunset Boulevard thing, where you feel like you're a prisoner with this person that you live with, because they're the only one that's paying you and helping you out and all that stuff. That's what's so exciting. And this movie just almost skims over that thing entirely. It's just a bunch of cliff notes. It's a bunch of plot points, little blurbs from the book and from the overall story, but it's not really its own story. It's not really its own thing to me. And I will admit that I am having a hard time, because I can't see it from the book and what I know, because I know a lot about the story, way more than I should, honestly. So everything that happened in this movie, I saw coming. I knew where they got it from. I knew everything that was happening. Nothing was new to me. But even if it was, I don't think I would have loved this movie either way, because I just don't think it's that great of a movie. I don't really think there's anything about this movie that stand out, once again, outside of the fact that it has Tommy Wiseau as a lead character, and he's fascinating in himself. But really, you could get everything that this movie gives you just by watching The Room. This doesn't really give you that other dimension that you're hoping for. While the book did add another dimension to it and did make The Room a richer experience, I think, if anything, this movie relies on The Room to be a rich experience, to be entertaining, while the book took The Room as a foundation and built something off of it and became its own thing. I don't think this movie has its own identity. I think that comes from a director that lacks style. But I do think the actors did give it their all, and I do think that it's an entertaining movie, and you will laugh at it and you will have fun. And if you are a hardcore fan of The Room and all this stuff, then it's worth seeing once for that experience, to kind of see these scenes filmed and kind of getting this idea of like you're there on the set. That's fun. Those parts are great. In fact, the movie might have benefited from just being all about The Room, because it's kind of quick. Even The Room part's like 20 minutes, a half hour of the movie, and they get through it quick, and they don't go into a lot of the stuff that's great. And I just, yeah, I'm sorry, that stuff bothered me. I mean, once again, I'm not trying to be a book purist, but why cut some of the most interesting stuff out? And why not focus on the more interesting elements? Tommy and Greg's friendship is a great part of the story, but that's not really what makes it so appealing. It's trying to solve this mystery of this guy, and this film isn't really that interested in the mystery. It only plays with it a little bit. That's just me, though. I know a lot of people love this movie. A lot of people say it's great, and they laughed, and they love behind-the-scenes stuff. I didn't see a lot of that. I thought it was very clinical approach to the material. I thought it was a very emotionally distant film. It only got by on the actors really bringing something to it. There's moments with Greg and Tommy that are really sweet, that make you feel bad or happy. And I was getting emotional during some of the parts of the movie. But like I said, those are only some scenes. It's not consistently being emotional and engaged throughout the movie. And I think settling just for a comedy, I don't know. That shows the lack of confidence to me on James Franco's part. Like, he really just made this movie so he could play Tommy and get all this acclaim for his performance, and he didn't really think about doing a proper version of this story and making a great film first. Because his performance is the standout thing, not the movie, when it should be the movie, not his performance. If that makes sense. Which always goes back to that James Franco ego thing. Or I think Rogan even said if Franco could clone himself, he would have sex with himself. Someone said that, Danny McBride. And that's how it feels with this. This is, which is kind of funny because that's what The Room was an ego project by Tommy. So maybe Franco doing that was an intentional thing, trying to be meta. But I think that's lacking because, like, once again, he doesn't really give you a point of view. If it had been Tommy's point of view, then the meta thing might have been fleshed out more. And there's just a lack of information. The movie expects you to understand a lot of these things and know what's going on and a lot of this stuff without explaining it. I knew a lot of it because I knew the backstory, but I think someone going into this blind, especially if you haven't seen The Room, I think a lot of it's just like, okay, this is random. A lot of this wouldn't work if it wasn't true, if we didn't know Tommy was a real guy. This would seem too silly and crazy, but we know a lot of this stuff happened, so it's believable. So The Disaster Artist, do I like it? I guess. I'm going to give my arbitrary rating. It's somewhere between a 6.5 and a 7 out of 10. I feel like I should be nice and give it a 7 because it's not a bad movie and it does have decent acting and parts I like. But I feel like it's an overall movie, flaws and all, and just how it's constructed and tone and how it's filmed. I think it's more like a 6.5 for me, honestly, 6.5 out of 10. But that's not a bad rating. Once again, I think it's that kind of movie. I think you can watch it, enjoy it, and that's it. I don't think it gives you much food for thought. And I don't like what they ignored, and I feel like it's still, at the end of the day, kind of a shallow version of the story, and that's what bothered me the most. I was hoping for something that cut a little deeper, like Ed Wood did. I just rewatched Ed Wood a few days ago. My girlfriend had never seen it, and I showed it to her, and I couldn't believe how well it holds up. I mean, I always loved Ed Wood, but man, it really transcends just being about movies and all that. It really gets to this emotional place where, you kind of fall in love with Ed Wood and Johnny Depp's performance and the whole universe you're in. You want to live in that universe. It's made in the way of the movies that it's from that time. It's made like one of those movies, and it has that tone. I think maybe James Franco was trying to go for something like that with this, but it doesn't. For me, it doesn't all mesh. But yeah, thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. And please rewind your VHS tapes before you bring them back to the store. I don't want to have to do it.